Here at Kirkwood Community College, we're blessed to have the opportunity to apply for an Endowed Faculty Chair, where we get some release from our teaching load to devote time to a project that we feel advances our teaching. I wanted to make a quick video to share my project, developing a spatially organized open education textbook for anatomy and physiology. First, this middle portion is essentially the chapter on the heart. There's additional chapters on all the other subjects in anatomy and physiology, so there's around 30 topics in total. If you'd like to interact with this textbook, you can find it on Prezi with a Google search of my name, DJ Henniger. This is the actual heart content in the middle, ignoring the blue boxes. This is the actual heart content in the middle, and if we start to zoom in, you can start to see the granular content that I use to teach the subject of the heart. Some intro slides. Next are things that we would start with would be size, weight, location, chambers of the heart valves, layers of the heart, coronary circulation, heart muscle cells, and the conduction system. Again, the blue boxes around the outside are there just for this presentation and outline what I think are the benefits of this spatial textbook. The first step in this process, and honestly one of the most limiting factors, was using copyright-free images. So the first thing I needed to do was replace all the artwork in the anatomy and physiology slides that I would normally use with copyright-free images. Using copyright-free images allows me to post course content to public spaces without running afoul of copyright law. Posting to public spaces has several benefits. First, it increases accessibility, so YouTube and Prezi can be accessed on multiple devices and while on mobile. I can easily share my materials with anyone, a student, non-students, colleagues. This, I feel, increases my accountability and motivation, and it also spreads the KCC name. By increasing accountability, I mean there's something really powerful about making a video and putting it out there in the public, because you know you want to be able to do your best, and so it pushes me to try my absolute best. Also, creating using public information demonstrates learning in the digital age where information is free, but it comes from a lot of different places. You need to be able to gather it. You need to be able to make sure you have digital literacy. You need to collate that information and conceptualize it into a big picture. One of my favorite phrases is we're moving from the information age to the conceptual age. Now information is free, but you got to turn it into a big picture, a big concept. Another thing, by using OER, the cost to the students are reduced by avoiding having to buy the textbook. Again, these are just images. There's a lot of images that are now available on Wikipedia or Creative Commons. I think that Prezi enhances navigation of the content quite a bit. By zooming in and zooming out in Prezi, a lot of information can be condensed into a smaller space. And because that information is condensed and it's easier to navigate through, you can find connections more easily. So for example, if I pan out here, we've got some basic content in the middle, but then maybe we'd like to go to heart cells, or we would like to go to cardiac output. So to begin with, the inner content is foundational, and as we move out, we start building up more and more information until we finally get to the really higher order information that I'll come back to in a little bit. But here again, we might look at the conduction system, how that relates to the cardiac cycle, so the sequence of events that the heart goes through to pump blood, relate that to basic ECG and complex 12-lead EKG. Or maybe we want to look at heart muscle cells, we want to divide those up into different types, or talk about how those muscle cells create cardiac output, which is to pump blood. Then we can talk about action potentials in each of those different types of muscle cells related to congestive heart failure, or we can even take it into what are the different possible drugs that would influence CM cells to affect heart contractility strength, or what are the different drugs that you can give to affect AR cells, which would affect heart rate. In addition to just creating a better navigation, there's a better organization too, I feel, in Prezi. So Prezi allows the information to be more spatially organized rather than linear like a PowerPoint or a textbook. One of the advantages of this, I feel, is you can chunk the various topics, and those chunks can be further organized. So for example, we have a chunk on heart muscle cells, we have a chunk on cardiac output. A different form of chunking is you can chunk the information temporally. I also encourage my students to use something called a Pomodoro timer technique, which basically balances work with rest so that they don't wear out their brain too fast. Essentially, it comes down to work for 20 minutes, take a 5-minute break. Work for 20 minutes, take a 5-minute break. Work for 20 minutes and take a 15-minute break, and then start all over again. So you'll notice that each of the slides or modules can basically be completed in 15 minutes. One of the things I encourage them to do is if you don't get it in that first 15 minutes, then spend another 15 minutes on that topic, or 20 minutes, whatever they're setting their Pomodoro for. The structure also allows that, again, you have to get the foundational knowledge before you can start radiating out. So you should definitely spend your full Pomodoro timer or do it multiple times if you don't understand one of the foundational knowledge subjects. One of the key things also is, I think, by having the slide with the text, I'll come back to this, is it can all be viewed on the screen of a smartphone, so they can get all of this content on a smartphone. Also, by using slides like this, I can still create a PowerPoint and hand that PowerPoint out to students, because that's one of the disadvantages of Prezi, is it's hard to create a handout. Next up is advanced organization through Bloom's integrations. While Bloom's taxonomy is a useful tool in all subject matter, it's especially useful in anatomy and physiology, where students must remember and understand a large compendium of facts, and then, as they move through their programs, use those facts to apply, analyze, evaluate, and create things like diagnoses and treatment strategies. Even as students move from A&P 1 to A&P 2, there's still a significant shift up Bloom's taxonomy. Prezi allows me to integrate Bloom's taxonomy in the content so the students are intimately aware of the different types of thinking categorized by Bloom's. So there's color-coded remembering information, understanding information, analyzing information, and evaluating information. Before I move on, just one more little theory is, I feel like anytime you can make life easier for the students, you can ask them a more difficult question. They have a certain pool of frustration that you can draw upon, and if you remove some of that frustration by adding organization and making things easier, then you can get that frustration back out of them by asking a more difficult question. So one of the things I think integrating with Bloom's does is that it makes sure that they understand what learning is. Learning involves building up facts. It's not just the memorization of facts. And again, by building up through Bloom's, the student knows they have to learn the foundational knowledge first. This also likely saves them the frustration of trying to learn things they don't yet have the foundation for. They're trying to memorize something, but they don't have the basic facts yet because they haven't done the foundation. So the student is made more aware that learning is not just memorizing facts, but there's an important manipulation of facts, a building up of facts, and a more complex use of facts in order to actually learn. The student is shown this classification and the color coding as well. So these little hourglasses have Bloom's taxonomy. We'll get to the middle in a second. That'll be my next thing. But these little hourglasses show up on each of the chapters or each of the modules. And again, there's color coding to those to show them the relative difficulty of the material. That's another advantage, is based on the topic, they kind of know what areas are going to be more complex. So here's size, weight, and location. Fairly simple, although there's some application kind of things. Clearly over here, because there's a lot more circles, cardiac muscle is much more complex. Even the subject matter, when they first open the Prezi and see the subject matter of a particular topic, they can see how difficult that topic is going to be. So blood would be simpler, respiratory system would be more complex, urinary system would be incredibly complex, electrolytes would be very complex. So the students get a quick early view of how complex a topic is by how much green, blue, and purple there are, and how many modules there are. After reading a book called Understanding by Design by Grant Wiggins, I formulated what I think are the big ideas in anatomy and physiology. The first is critical thinking. They have to be able to ask questions, use digital literacy to curate that information, avoid logical fallacies, like don't just always go to certain sources, don't use confirmation bias where you're always looking for people that agree with you. Socially collaborate, because more brains are better than one, and then try to see the big picture rather than just memorizing facts. If you do those steps, you'll ask better questions, and to me, that's what critical thinking is. I want my students to simplify complex things. They don't understand something until they can explain it to their mom or 9-year-old kid. The three main topics for us are feedback, so homeostasis and positive feedback, hierarchical interrelationships, so how does an atom affect a molecule, how does a molecule affect an organelle a cell a tissue an organ system, an organism, and also organ system interrelationships. I want them to keep always looking for organ system interrelationships. So how does the liver help the immune system by making complement? How does the liver help the cardiovascular system by creating clotting factors? How does the liver affect the brain? By storing B vitamins, which are important for energy. So see those organ system interrelationships. And another one that's always really important for me is form and function. How does anatomy, which is how something looks, relate to physiology, which is how something works? And then let's extend that into clinical testing, so things like EKG or urinalysis. Let's extend that into clinical care. Why does somebody that has kidney failure, why do they have to watch their protein levels? Or, keeping with the content of heart, if you know that somebody's on a diuretic and it's going to lower their potassium, how could that change their EKG or heart function? Pharmacology, so we'll go into cardiac drugs to explain how drugs will affect action potentials in the cardiac muscle. And then, of course, pathology, so things like congestive heart failure and things like that. You'll notice all of the topics that we begin with in the middle will extend out to a mastery level circle, where essentially there'll be a suggestion for something for them to look up, which will improve their mastery level skills. One of my beliefs is that mastery helps Bloom's taxonomy, and Bloom's taxonomy helps mastery skills. So that's the basis of this figure, is by using their mastery skills, they'll get better at building up their understanding of Bloom's taxonomy, and by using Bloom's taxonomy, they'll improve their mastery skills. So moving on next. So after a discussion with colleagues at the Collaborative Learning Days at Kirkwood, I decided to add text to each slide. I think adding a text adds several advantages. So first of all, the text encourages reading skills, an environment that no longer absolutely requires reading. And I'm probably as guilty of that as anyone because I like to create videos so that the students can hear the content. Their entire MOOC course is only using video. I don't think students have to rely on teaching the way I did when I was a student, but they do still need to improve their reading of technical information. So by adding the text, I hope that I'm encouraging them to read. I've also found personally that when I watch videos from Linda on training like software and things like that, or they have educational videos too, or videos on education, they will have a script, and that reading that script and listening helps me to acquire the information more readily. Something about hearing and seeing and reading at the same time helps me to understand, kind of like you can understand somebody better if you can read their lips. So when a teacher turns around and draws on the board, this is my problem. The student can no longer read their lips, and it's harder for the student to understand what's being spoken. The text on the side also is a form of closed captioning, and I don't know if this is true, but it appears that YouTube might be able to use this text to improve their closed captioning because the videos that have the text on the side have much more accurate closed captioning when on YouTube. Lastly, the text allows a student to kind of have a narration while just on the Prezi app. So maybe they're in a place where they can't listen, well, they can still read the text and read the narration on the Prezi app. And that essentially makes the textbook not necessarily dependent on sound when you're on the smartphone app on Prezi. So here again, just an example of each of the slides has text off to the side. I record each of these Prezis as a YouTube video, something I've been doing for quite a long time. And the main thing for me is that sometimes students can gain foundational knowledge when their hands are busy, but their brain is free. So if they're doing the dishes or if they're changing the oil in their car, they can be listening to this conversation. Or if they're driving to campus, because this is a commuter college, then they can listen to the content while riding to class. Also, students can repeat information over and over, which is especially helpful for ESL students when a student misses a class, or the student just needs to break up the information into smaller chunks and rest a little bit more. Lastly, I'll come to this in the next box, but I think being able to move to a smartphone has great advantages. So this is just an example of video integration. One of the things that I've noticed about myself is my behavior has changed with regards to smart devices. And the easiest way to say this is I used to have iPads and I used to use them a lot. I still have iPads, but I just don't use them anymore because almost everything that I can do on the iPad, I can now do on my phone. In fact, with things like text to speech, now I can do a lot of typing and things like that on my phone, so I don't even necessarily need a laptop. So one of the things that I think is a great advantage of using the Prezi app is you can move this content essentially all to the smartphone. Now, of course, publishers will have like textbooks and PDFs available on the smartphone, but I don't know that they're necessarily designed to work almost solely on a smartphone if a student wants to use that. By breaking things down into modules, everything can be accessed simply on a smartphone, which has a great many advantages because it's always on the student. So in wait times, if they're waiting for their kid to get done with gymnastics, if they have 10 minutes here, they can access the entire textbook and it's really quick and look up the textbook. It's just right there on the Prezi app. So each one of these small little slides would be stepped through in Prezi so that the student would see all of those slides. Kind of a side note is the student can follow the path that I've created. So the steps I've created start from the middle and radiate out. And then from the next step, radiate out. Next step out, radiate out. The student can choose to start on the outside, which would basically be a top-down kind of learning. You start with the why do I want to know this, and then you go get the facts. Or the way I do the path, and again, the student is free to do it a different way, is start with the facts and build up through the facts to the why. A key thing for me, too, is of course textbooks and other sources have assessments that are linked to each objective. but it's not as one-to-one linked as is possible with Prezi. So each of the boxes, if you have a box on conduction system, end the box or end the circle with an actual assessment. Not necessarily a summative assessment, but at least a formative assessment, because the student is going to know if they got the question right or wrong, and whether they should go back through and read again if they missed the question. So it's right there in a one-to-one assessment for each of the modules. It's not completely complete yet, but one of the things I would like to do is do this definitely for each of the circles. It's in there for a lot of them now. I would also like to create objectives and assessments that are based on Simon Sinek's suggestion of start with why. So create competencies that have a what, a how, and a why. So use knowledge of the cardiac electrical system, which is a what, to understand the physiology of the ECG, which is the how, and evaluate how the ECG changes with structural and electrolyte changes, and how anatomy links to physiology, to clinical testing, and pathology. You can see my big ideas in there, but those are the whys. So you can clearly see that I've got some questions here, but if we zoom out, the idea would be to make sure that you have questions in each one of these circles. Ideally, and maybe it's just an advancement that Prezi needs to make or different software, but it would be very nice if they have to answer 10 questions before they move out of this box, and then this box changes colors to know that the student essentially knows that I keep saying box, but that circle is complete. That would be ideal, maybe in the next 5 years. The last thing is just to keep moving forward. So one of the great benefits of Prezi is it's a large canvas that allows easy editing and continued development. So if I find a different teaching lesson, it's really easy to add it to the Prezi. Obviously, I would need to re-record the video, but if the student is using the Prezi on a smartphone app, they get the update right away as well. So one of the things I would like to do is add more videos. I'll go to that in a second here. I want to add more assessments. I want to make sure that I got everything done. I've got everything done for A&P 2 and mostly done for A&P 1. I still have a ways to go. I'd like to add things to iTunes U, and ultimately it would be nice to collect data to compare student success and retention rates using this resource versus other methods of delivery. One of the other things I want to do is I want to add more interesting videos or more immersive videos. This is a 360 video. And essentially what it's doing, I might pause it quick, but I'm walking through the heart in a pre-lab, and I'm using a 360 camera. So essentially what I have back here is a microscope that will project on the screen. I can also project on the screen this presentation, my heart presentation. I have a whiteboard if I want to draw, and I have several specimens. So these specimens would show like myocardial infarction. This is a bypass surgery model, human torso model, so you can see the heart. It looks like I pulled the heart out. A nice big model of the heart here, so I can walk through the anatomy to prepare the student for the heart anatomy that they need to know for lab. A specimen here that I think is a specimen that's supposed to be a normal specimen, but it looks awfully like congestive heart failure. Atherosclerosis model, and essentially I can walk them through. So here I've got the microscope cam on, and I'm showing cardiac muscle, and eventually I'm going to start drawing cardiac muscle so that the student can see the 4 major qualities of cardiac muscle, which is, I won't bore you with that. Anyway, branch striated intercalated discs and single offset nucleus. So that's my project. Thank you.